Cancer research and Ponzi schemes. Two things that sound like they couldn't possibly have anything in common. One brings hope, the other is a financial fraud. But what if I told you that the way money moves through the cancer research industry shares unsettling similarities with how Ponzi schemes are structured? Not in terms of intentional fraud, but in terms of incentives, expectations, and the unsustainable growth promises built into the system. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a look at how a broken funding model, distorted expectations, and media hype can create feedback loops in cancer research that echo the same mechanics Charles Ponzi used over a century ago. And to understand how, we need to start with a simple question. Why does cancer still exist? In 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon signed the National Cancer Act, launching what became known as the War on Cancer. Billions of dollars flowed into labs. Universities hired armies of biologists, and pharma companies ramped up R&D. The promise was clear. With enough funding, we could conquer cancer. Since then, the United States alone has spent over $200 billion on cancer research. And it's not just public money. Private donations, charity runs, celebrity telethons, they all pour billions more into the system. Now here's the thing. This is money people give in good faith. When you or someone you love has cancer, hope is priceless. But when you zoom out, a darker pattern begins to emerge. Every few months, the press announces that scientists have made a major step toward a cure. But despite all this, cancer remains the second leading cause of death worldwide, and mortality rates for many cancers remain high, particularly if not caught early. How can this be? Where are the advances, and where is all the money going? To understand what's happening, let's look at how the funding cycle works. Step 1. A researcher applies for a grant. The grant committee doesn't want to fund routine work. They want bold, exciting, novel science. So scientists learn to write proposals that sound just a little more optimistic than reality allows. Step 2. If funded, the lab runs experiments. But science is messy. Cancer is incredibly complex. Often the results are inconclusive or negative. Step 3. Publish or perish. Because without publication, there's no way to attract new grants. But journals don't like boring results. So scientists slice data, pick endpoints, and craft stories that make even modest findings seem groundbreaking. Step 4. Enter the media. Press teams spin the story into public headlines. The problem is that most of these are just mouse studies, or cell lines in petri dishes, not actual human treatments. And step 5? The scientist gets renewed funding based on the promise of their earlier work. And the cycle begins again. This is not fraud, but it is a system built on inflated expectations. And every new grant relies on the promise that we're closer to a cure. That's where the comparison to Ponzi schemes comes in. What is a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, is a type of fraud where returns to old investors are paid using money from new investors, not from actual profit. It works great for a while. As long as more and more people keep investing, early investors keep getting paid. They may honestly feel they have found a great way to make money, and so they bring more people in. But eventually the system collapses, because it relies on exponential growth to sustain the illusion of success. Now, cancer research is not a scam. The people in this field are usually honest, dedicated scientists. But the structure of the funding model has a disturbing similarity. It depends on the continued inflow of money, driven by the promise of results that are often exaggerated, misinterpreted, or delayed indefinitely. And the system has to keep growing. Because if it slows down, funding dries up, labs shut down, and careers evaporate. The economy of perpetual progress. The cancer research system rewards novelty over replication, big promises over boring truths, and hype over reality. Let's take two real examples. A study in JAMA Oncology found that 94 news articles in just 5 days used buzzwords like breakthrough, miracle, and game changer to describe 36 different cancer drugs. But half had no FDA approval, and 14% hadn't even reached human trials. Another example, a survey of cancer breakthroughs reported by an Australian newspaper from 1992 to 1994 found that 43% were not supported by later research, 10% were disproven, and just 27% resulted in actual clinical practice. The issue here isn't that many of these approaches failed. After all, researchers can't know what will be successful before doing the research. The problem is that many of these studies were oversold or hyped again and again before there were conclusive results, or even when results were poor. This mirrors what happens in Ponzi schemes. The vague promise of future success is used to justify the current flow of money. Winners and losers. Let's follow the money. Cancer research employs tens of thousands of scientists. It supports entire university departments. It keeps biotech startups alive, fuels conferences, pays for equipment, and builds reputations. Then there's the pharmaceutical industry. Drug development is big business. A single cancer drug can cost $100,000 or more per patient per year. In 2024, the global oncology drug market passed $300 billion. There's real innovation here, but also clear incentives to prioritize high-margin drugs over curative ones. Why cure a disease in one shot when they can treat it for life? And finally, we have charities. Some are excellent, others less so. In 2015, the Federal Trade Commission found that 4 cancer charities had spent less than 3% of donations on actual patients. Meanwhile, the people who lose in this system are often patients who are promised too much, too soon, families who donate in good faith, and early career scientists trapped in a system that punishes caution and rewards exaggeration. Replication crisis. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Much of cancer research may not be reproducible. In a major effort called the Reproducibility Project, scientists tried to replicate key findings in cancer biology, but only about 10% could be reproduced. This isn't because of bad scientists. It's because of a toxic mix of pressure to publish, confirmation bias, and poor statistical practices. When your funding, your job, and your reputation depend on showing success, failure to find a breakthrough becomes a career risk. That leads to a staggering amount of research waste. A 2009 study in The Lancet estimated that 85% of biomedical research funding is wasted, mostly because of poor study design, failure to publish negative results, and duplication of effort. Again, it's not fraud, but it's not far off from the illusion of growth in a Ponzi scheme, where the appearance of progress masks a system under strain. Closing the loop. So what's the way forward? We can start by recognizing the difference between hope and hype. Science is slow and oftentimes inconclusive, but progress is real, just not always dramatic or linear. Second, we can fund more replication studies and reward researchers for careful, honest work. That means rethinking journal incentives, grant structures, and academic promotions. Third, we can be more transparent. Instead of shouting cure from the headlines, let's talk about incremental gains, risk, and uncertainty. Let's treat the public like adults. And finally, we need to shift some focus to prevention, early detection, and access, areas that deliver enormous value but don't make splashy headlines or big profits. Because cancer is not a single disease. It's hundreds of diseases, and solving it won't be a single moment. It will be 1,000 quiet steps taken honestly. The war on cancer isn't a scam, but it is being fought on a battlefield filled with perverse incentives. While Ponzi schemes collapse under their own weight, science, when done right, builds something real. It's time to rethink the way we fund hope. Thank you for watching Into the Loop.